the reason why you're not able to attract A players, or the reason why some people have retention issues, because I was 100% guilty of this, is you have.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Today we got Robbie Woelkers on the podcast. Been following Robbie for years now. Had Joey Albritton on the show a couple times already. And we've been, Robbie's busy. We've been trying to get him on the pod. Finally, we got him. We're going to talk about physical therapy practices, outpatient, the pros and cons of opening up your second or third or fourth location and expanding and growth. And there's a whole lot of challenges around that now with cost of living and reimbursement and salary demands and, human capital and all that. Robbie, first of all, good afternoon, dude. Welcome on.
Welcome, man. Hey, pleasure to be on. I was telling you even before this, I was like, I watch your podcast. I love all the different episodes. My wife sits there and she's just like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm listening to Dave. So just tell the kids to keep it down. Especially when you and Anthony riff out and go back and forth and stuff like that. Anthony Maritato. Awesome. So I appreciate it. The only thing though, is I have to get my studio to look like your studio, because you got better pictures and stuff than me. I got blank walls and a board behind me. So there you go, man.
I'm in Brooklyn. This is our guest bedroom and now new podcast studio. I used to be in another room. That's now the baby's room. And so I got kicked to the third room. You got to do what you got to do.
No, you got it. Sometimes when that baby comes, you get kicked out of rooms, and that's where I am relinquished to the basement right now. So I'm in the basement of my home because I got two girls now, and they got two rooms upstairs, and my office is now transported to the basement. So if you are lucky on this podcast and you have headphones on, you might hear harmonicas playing upstairs. So that's where we're good. I can hear them upstairs just jamming out. Yeah,
totally fine with any background music. Totally fine.
Okay. With it. Awesome. Just trying to let the room know, setting expectations. That's so awesome, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so we're talking about locations, right? And I said a couple times on my show, so I'm in Brooklyn, but I'm from New Jersey. I went to physical therapy school in Philly. So there's a whole bunch of big groups and chains in the whole East Coast area that I know of. And it seems like there's still popping up new locations, right? So there's Strive Physical Therapy that you might know that's owned by Confluent. There's Jag One, which is now back to Jag Physical Therapy. There's Motion, who I used to be kind of affiliated with. I used to work with them when they were Metro Sports Med. I don't understand. I've talked to some practice owners. I'm like, how is it even possible to have more physical therapy locations open now? And I'm not even talking about clients that work with you or not. I'm saying these bigger groups that are popping up de novo clinics. And I said it before, I don't know if you want to get into it, but I said it before, is it because there's more awareness for physical therapy? Are we getting more direct access? Is it Facebook and Instagram that's allowing the public to learn a little bit more of what we're doing? And is there a bigger funnel of people coming into physical therapy? Because otherwise, I don't understand how it's possible for the corporates to pop open new de novos, let alone the independents that are the younger entrepreneurs that work with you guys that are looking to go from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2. So I'll preface that. And I know you want to say some things around what you guys are doing and opening clinics and all that.
No, that's a great question, because it's just well, first of all, why should I even get into opening in my own location? And, there's so many PT clinics out there and stuff like that. Maybe it's when you compare it to chiropractor, we're not even a blip on the radar compared to how many chiro clinics are out there and stuff like that, which is interesting. But ideally, my mantra in everything is that every single person in the world needs physical therapy. They just don't know it yet. And I think that when you realize that every single person that you encounter could benefit from PT, right? And that's either getting someone out of pain, that's either strength, mobility, flexibility, that's either getting them back to participation or to improve performance, or get them into a wellness kind of situation where, they're good and you just want to get into more prevention, right? Or we got older people now, we got the baby boomers coming through. A lot of people out there and a lot of demands. We have a shortage of PTs. COVID kind of hit, and, people weren't going to PT school during that time, or they started moving to virtual. Because of that, out of the classroom a little bit. Some of the board exams, we're having lower pass rates on the board exams right now, and you have lower PTs coming through. We got lower board exam scores. We just have a little shortage of PTs. But that being said, we got more PT schools opening up than we ever before. More people get into credit. We have a little bit more supply demand things going on. It's a $62 billion industry. There's a lot of potential here. But also what's happening right now, I had a benefit of linking up with a couple of people to discuss this, is that there's 7-year cycles where you could basically have your physical therapy clinic if you start, and you could grow it for about 5-7 years. And then private equity is going to come in and they're going to be like, hey, let's take a peek under the hood, see if there's anything worth buying here. And I loved your podcast before. It's like, why are some PT clinics worth like $0? And it's just like, because they want to come in and see how risky it is. Because they're investors. They want to come in, they want to invest their money, and they want to see like, hey, what's under the hood here? What makes sense? And then they're going to peak, and then they're going to be like, ooh, this is kind of juicy. They're looking for the sleeping giants, the ones that are like good visits and stuff, but they know when they sprinkle in their like insurance contracts, they're just going to blow it up. And they have recruiting channels and different things. They're like, hey, or market share. They want to come in and take over a little bit of market share. And then ultimately what happens is after about 7 years, this private equity come in and then they scoop up a bunch of clinics and then they roll them all up to sell to the bigger guys. Right. Yep. So I don't know if you know Pivot. Pivot's in our area. And Pivot came in and they're just popping up and they're buying all their Benchmark, right? Benchmark, Pivot, they're all coming in. They're buying all these little private equities and or private PT clinics, with 1, 2, 4 multiple locations. And now all of a sudden they do all these small deals and they have this big grouping, right? 125 clinics they just acquired or whatever that looks like. And then all of a sudden they go to the next tier and they're like, hey, Athletico, we have 125 clinics. Would you like them? And they're like, sure. And then they purchase. So it's like everybody's kind of getting rolled up into something. And I think the biggest thing for this podcast is just to let people know is that like you could be 5 years in business and you could actually have a sellable asset. And, we just did a challenge this week and there was about 40 people, 50 people on. And I asked that question, how many people know they could sell their business in less than 5 years for almost $1 million, $1 million plus, 2 million? Not a lot of hands went up. People are like, my biggest takeaway of this challenge is I could sell my business. It's crazy to me. So, and I'm sure you see that all the time with your podcast and stuff, that you get people shocked that they could sell their business. Kind of interesting.
And we're going to get into some of the key man risk and like absentee ownership and all that. And then also I wanted you to kind of tee up, you in the pre-interview, you said about the comparison of like, I think the rough offer that you guys had gotten for the 3 clinic locations once upon a time versus like a friend that had 1 location and 5 PTs or something, and they got like a larger offer. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, that's a great point.
Circle that now.
So I was going to. So we had started back. It wasn't a startup. Like we were fortunate enough. I was working in a PT clinic. It was a PT chiro clinic, and they leaned in and was like, "Hey, would you like to take over the PT side of things? We just want to do the chiro, just take over the PT, and we're good." There's this thing called money that you need to buy clinics. So new grad PT out of school, 1-2 years removed, doing home health, slinging visits, trying to do all the things, baby on the way. I'm like, I don't really have a lot of money here. So I partnered up with someone who had money to invest in, and we partnered. And we did it for about 5 years, got to the point where we have different visions, which is okay. And we decided like, hey, best way to keep this practice running and be successful is someone's got to go. And it's either I'm going to go or you're going to go. Who's going to go? And he wanted to stay. And I was like, hey, no worries. I got other things going on. I'll go. And we got a valuation. So at the time, we were doing three locations in Northern Virginia here. And, we're doing close to almost $2 million a year in revenue. Good margins coming through. I was getting paid. He was getting paid. My wife was doing some stuff in the business. His wife was doing some stuff in the business. So, people were getting paid. It's good. I was like, man, this thing's going to be worth some money. Let's go sell this thing. Got a valuation done, and we had 3 locations, almost 2. Came back at like a $1.4 million valuation. I had multiple clinics. We were growing. We were expanding. The P&L every 3 years going up. All of a sudden, about a year or so later, I have this buddy. Now I'm in DC. I'm in Virginia, right? I'm Northern Virginia, and he's just kind of across the pond here in Maryland. And he started about the same time I did, and he's growing his business. Now, granted, it was like a husband and wife combination, and he was a husband and wife combo, and he was running the business. She was kind of treating in it. And they grew to about 5-6 providers. And it's funny, I was looking at like a screenshot he texted me. He's like, hey, we're now at 5-6 providers doing 300 visits. We're profitable. Everything's good. And he's like, I'm thinking about selling. They got a valuation done, and they were at like a 1.6. We were like within the same kind of time frames. And he's only a state over, same reimbursements, all this stuff. So I sat there and I said, how the heck do I have 3 locations and doing more revenue, right? More patients, more visits, and I got a 1.4. And he's over here with a little less patients than we were doing by about 150 a month and a little less revenue per year. And he got a 1.6. And that's where I got introduced to kind of what we'll go over today is kind of like my 6 commandments here for like opening new locations, because sometimes people think opening more new locations means more bang for their buck and more sellability and more revenue on the way out. It's not always the case. And, I think that that's interesting to see. And people, first thing, know that you could sell your business. Like, that's a cool thing. Like, some people, you'll work your whole life for $1 million retirement. Like, if, most people in the world will make $1 million when they work for 40 years. Just do the math, right? Minimum wage people will make $1 million working 40 hours a week for 40 years. Like, they'll make $1 million. But if we're looking at collapsing timeframes here, like, you could go all in for like 5 years, grow to 4 or 5 providers and be able to sell and get almost $1.6 million. People don't realize that. So that's why if you're listening to the podcast, like, hopefully that just inspires you a little bit to be like, oh, maybe I do just need to keep going a little bit, right? I'm so close to Dave. I don't know if you ever saw the meme where the little cartoon where they're in the mine there and the gold's behind the wall and like the miner's there and he's chipping away and then he just kind of puts the mine or the pickaxe down and walks away. He's like 2 hits away from hitting the gold. It's like some people are 2 hires away from hitting the gold and then they're a little beat up, right? They're producing all the time. And, growing and scaling means that if I grow and scale, that means I have to donate more of my time to the business. And I got to take away from my family. You just had a little baby boy. I got 2 little girls. I don't want to take time away from my family, right? So I think as we go through the podcast today, just know that like a lot of people are like, I want more freedom, but I got to give up control. If I want more control, I got to give up a little freedom here. So we got to kind of figure out what that looks like. So yeah, man. So hopefully that sets the stage for, don't do it like I did it. I always tell my clients or anybody I work with is like, this isn't Robbie's success stories. This is do not do what I did. That's kind of how we learn from this stuff. So awesome stuff, man.
No, I love it. That definitely sets the stage, sets the table. So now we'll go into, I think you said like your 6 commandments for doing this the optimal way or one of the best ways that you've seen the work.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at this for like opening more locations and like, when does it make sense? And, I told because people right now are probably like, hey, well, what was the difference? And that was when I was introduced to this concept called key man or key woman risk. And when we were doing the valuation, the guy had like a sheet there and he was just like going through and like, what makes the business like appealing, like something to be interested in. They're like, oh, good numbers, your revenue, awesome, your EBITDA, right? Earnings before income tax, all that stuff, right? They're like, oh, so profit margins, it looks juicy. But then there was a thing on the sheet that it was just like multiple adders and multiple subtractors. And I'm like, what are those? Like, and what are those subtractors? And he's just like, well, these are things that put your business at a little bit of a risk. And I said, oh, okay, well, how risky is my business? And then when I was going over to the clinic that was a 1.6, I was looking at that and I was just like, now I know why they're worth more, why one was worth less, why one was worth more. And so ultimately, when we look at a business and like, Dave, maybe you're here and you're saying like, hey, I'm growing, I'm expanding, I'm thinking about opening another location. And I would sit here and I'd be like, awesome, let's pull up my 6 little checklist here, 6-point checklist, and let's see how many boxes we could check off. Okay. So number 1, and this is almost like a non-negotiable. Actually, it is a non-negotiable. And this is where people get a little triggered because they're just like, I spent 7 years going to school. I've done CEUs. I love my patients. I love working 1v1, right? Well, do you want to work 1-to-1 with a patient or do you want to 1-to-many? And you want to have bigger influence here. We've got to make a decision. So number 1 rule, right? Thou shalt not treat. It is what it is. The reason for that is if you look at focus, and if you have focus on one thing, it's 100% of your focus. As soon as you move to 2 things, it's 50-50 or 80-20, 60-40, whatever the split is. You move to 3 things, it's 33%. You move to 4, it's 25. You move to 5, it's 20. You guys get the idea. right? You move to 6 is 14. Well, 14 to 20 is 4. 20 to 25 is 5% change. 25 to 33, right? And you start going up here. The biggest change is when you drop from one thing to two things. It's a 50% change in your focus. So if you guys are going, and I don't know if you ever had the experience of like having a business, but then maybe trying to start something else, right? I had my clinics. I was trying to do coaching and trying to do Facebook stuff. So a lot of different split focus here, right? People talk about work-life balance. What about work balance? Or business balance, right? So ultimately what happens is like you have to find a building, you have to find the lease space, you have to negotiate terms, you have to get the equipment, you have to hire, you have to onboard, you have to train, you have to mark. I could go through the whole list. We're not even talking about when disruption shows up and there's all this other stuff. We have people that want to open in November, but the building's not ready until May because they didn't get an occupant. Crazy stuff happens. So you can't be treating and trying to open at the same time, right? So rule number one is going to be removing the owner from treatment. So we go back to key man risk. It's a 3 multiple subtractor. If you have an owner who's in the business providing the service, it's a -3 for some valuation companies. That's crazy to me. I was at key man risk because I was treating. So
and just for context, do you remember, were you was it 40 hours where you were
slamming visits? 60? Yes. 3 locations, slamming visits. I was out in we had a rural clinic out in Bealton because we're going to get to some of the other commandments here where, hey, no one's out there. So it's a great opportunity, right? The whole shiny, hey, no one's out here, right? We could just go out here and just slam visits, right? And there's a reason why no one's out there, right? There's a reason why gas stations all kind of congregate at the corner. There's a reason why all the fast food chains congregate in the 1 mile radius. There's a reason why Home Depot and Lowe's are next to each other.
They've already done the market research for us.
Yeah, they are. And they're leveraging a principle where like if you were at the beach selling ice cream cones, right? And it was me and you, and we said like, okay, well, Dave, you take the north end and I'll take the south. Well, if we split it up, it's just like, well, you get part of the beach over here and I get part of the beach over here, but we're splitting the audience. But if we get together and we say, hey, let's meet on the 50-yard line, and then everybody comes to us, well, now we have a better opportunity to be able to see the same. That's why all the PT clinics open near each other. Why is there a Select? Why is there Athletico? Why is there ATI? Why is there Benchmark? Why are they in a 1 mile, 2 mile radius? Get out of my neighborhood, right? But that's why they do that, because now the audience has to come to that area to be able to get their treatment. It's kind of cool thing when you look at these principles. So rule number 1 is thou shalt not treat, because mainly we can't be a producer and also an operator at the same time. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to your patient. First of all, that's just for anybody. It's like when you're treating patients, are you really treating a patient? Right? Because you're there, but you're not really there. And all my owners know what I'm saying. Like you're with the patient, but you're thinking about 100 other things. I promise you that. So let somebody else treat that patient 100%. You could step in, you could do PTO, right? PTO coverage. You guys get some credits for your CEO. I get all that. You got to do your license renewal. There'll be opportunities, but not full time. Cool. So rule number 1, Dave, any questions on that? So got to remove the owner from treatment.
100% agreed. I have no pushback. I love it. And for us on the buy side, like it immediately is less risky because if we were going to look at Robbie back when you had your clinics, we look at like the key man, key woman risk. If they get hit by the hypothetical bus, we just lost a ton of visits, and that person was like managing the day-to-day and trying to grow it and treating patients. There's too much wrapped around them in what they do. So I have no pushback on it. I love it.
Okay, good. So I'm always just like, are you okay with that? And you're like, no, it's what we teach. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. So it's just like, all right, moving on. But now for whatever reason, if you do have a little bit, if you're listening to the podcast right now and you're just like, well, I'm not going to get out of treatment. Okay, that's fine. We're going to get to step 2. This is for you, right? But just always ask yourself the question, am I a PT who happens to be an owner, or am I an owner who happens to be a PT, right? Because you'll know really, really quickly when you say that statement to yourself, like who you want to become, right? Because if you're all in on treating, then be all in on treating. But if you still need to grow your business, because here's why, and before I get into number 2 here, like I need to make sure that everybody's clear on this. Like the reason why you're not able to attract A players Or the reason why some people have retention issues, because I was 100% guilty of this, is you have to have a vision that's so big that other people can fit their careers inside of it, right? So if you have a small vision, you're just like, hey, it's just me, the admin and my dog that's here every day. Like, this is just us. Come and work for us. They're going to be like, hey, cool story, but I don't like I wanted to do this. I want to do that. I want to work. So like A players want to be part of A companies. Like they want to be part of something big, some change, right? You can attract people that don't want that. They want to, Joey and I call it an LSB, a lifestyle business, right? They want to be an LSB. They want to just come in, show up, treat their patients, do their notes, minimal. Fine. They want to own a job. That's fine. However, if you want to attract really key players here and grow this thing, and people get excited, because people all the time, Dave, I'm sure you hear this, like, how do I get my team to care about the business more than I do? Well, then you better show up with a big, I don't curse, a big vision, right? So it's like, make sure you're there. So great, just want to make sure we paint the stage there. So if you want to treat, but if you want to go and open multiple locations, rule number 2, thou shalt not open clinic number 2 or multiple locations if they do not have a leadership team running the first location. And when I say a leadership team, I think a lot of people just say, hey, Dave Kittle, you're an amazing provider. Let's go ahead and promote you to clinical director. Awesome. And I'm still over here doing the hiring, onboarding, and training. And I'm still holding people accountable and setting expectations and being like, hey, Dave, let's go over your measurements and KPIs. Let me give you feedback, right? Your leadership team needs to be, you mentioned the bus thing. Like if Robbie got hit by the bus, can the business still not grow, but can the business still sustain without me there? Right. That's the key man risk. Right. So we got to get owner out of producing. Right. That's a -3 when you have a key man risk. So kind of point number 1 is, are they producing? 2 out of 3 is, are they managing? Right. Is an owner part of management? And not managing your leadership team or your C-level executives, but managing your producers, right? Your office admins, your techs, your PTs, your PTAs. So in number 2, it's just like, can we get an owner out of management? Because you're going to be over here. Well, what happens when clinic 1, you lose a provider? Who's going to do the hiring, onboarding, and training? Who's going to be the one over there managing people when there's an issue? Patient comes in hot. Who's going to do the de-escalation, right? When a staff member comes in hot, who's going to do the de-escalation, right? Who's going to promote people? Who's going to meet people for peer reviews? All that stuff, right? So once you get a leadership team in place, and that takes time, a good leadership team, because this is kind of a writer downer for those that are on the podcast, is that if you're a leader, by definition, you need to have followers. And followers are either earned or manipulated. There's a lot of history of that. So we put people in leadership position who we have nobody following them. And then sometimes it really crushes the culture there. So never promote like a tier 3 or tier 4 employee into a leadership position. Oh, well, it'll kill your culture, right? So ultimately, it's just like, without harping on that too much, unless Dave, you have any questions, it's like, we got to get a leadership team in place. And the key there is enterprise value of, can my business sustain without me there? So yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So really quick, when you say the -3, I just want to give the audience context, especially like, because I know you got a big following. So there might be people that watch this for the first time. And if they're not understanding like the
cool.
multiples. So let's just say hypothetically, I don't remember the numbers. You said 2 million in revenue, but let's just say that buyer was going to value you guys at like a 6x EBITDA multiple, but then they saw that you had the key man risk where you were doing too much, you were treating too much, and you said -3. I'm using your words. Okay. So that it could hypothetically be this practice, the 3 locations that you had owned or co-owned would have had a 6x multiple, but there was too much wrapped around you, and you said -3, so it might have been a 3x multiple. I'm just like, for rough numbers.
Yeah, we're just
that's how your valuation was of 3 locations that produced more visits, was a lower valuation than your friends that had the 1 location where they were out of treatment and it was more streamlined, and they didn't have the key man risk that you had.
Yeah.
Just give context.
Yeah, because they'll come in and great example. And guys, again, if you're getting valuations for your company, hire experts, right? So this is stuff we've learned. This isn't like, we're not merger and acquisition lawyers and stuff like that. So there's really smart people out there to do this kind of stuff. But they'll come in, they'll be like, hey man, everything looks great. This would be a 5 or 6 multiple. So whatever your EBIT is, multiply it by 5, and here's what we would buy this thing for. But then they'll be like, however, because you're stuck with treating 40 hours a week, we're going to -1 multiple. And because we don't have any leadership team in place, or your leadership that is there, if they were to get so then they're like, there's another minus multiple, right? And then now the next one's going to be like, do we have? And I was all three, just by the way. So then the next one, so number 3 and 4 are kind of tangible to each other. So I'll just kind of finish the thought with giving you 3 and 4. Because we see this all the time, is that owners go to open up multiple locations, but thou shalt not open another location unless they maxed out their first one. What are we doing?
It seems obvious, right?
Seems obvious. What are we doing? Right? But guilty. I was over here. I was like, hey, we're not maxed out yet. We got more space, but let's open. New opportunity. Got an opportunity. Let me open up. And Dave, this is crazy. When I look back on it, we were making more revenue and profit with our first location, just slamming visits, doing like 300 visits a week. And then I was just like, but let's go to clinic number 2. And let's pull some providers down and open clinic number 2. And then all of a sudden you start to get to the point where we're like, now we have more expenses and we're doing the same volume, but we have 2 locations. It's like, what are we doing? Right. So ultimately, number 3 is like, thou shalt not open more locations unless you max out. And that's where when I say max out, we're looking at our square footage. Like, how many tables can we get in here? How many providers can we get in here? A good rule of thumb for clinics. I know we have a lot of mobile listeners here. Some people are doing subleases, some people in the clinics. But if you have a clinic, a good rule is like a 10% rule, right? So whatever your square footage is, just multiply by 10%. And that's how many visits you can do on a weekly basis. So if you have 3,000 square feet, you should be able to comfortably do around 300 visits a week, right? Now, I'm not here to argue, like, is that one-on-one for an hour? Is that, because like, if you have one-on-one for an hour, it's like 1 table you need. 1 patient. But if you have like, one-on-one for 40 minutes, or maybe you have 2 patients coming in an hour at 30s, depending on which state and reimbursement and all that looks like, you might need some more tables. So I don't know what that is for you, but you could look around your clinic and be like, hey, can we max this thing out? Because in order to open up more locations, you just need more space.
Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE@CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.